Hello, I'm Lucy.
Hi, and I'm Berno.
And if you have no idea what's going on, we've
Where have you been?
where have you been?
Surely you should know what's going on right now.
Then check out the other videos that we've got
Yeah,
on this series.
because we're talking about self-love and selfless love and Jesus and the church and Christianity and yes, all these things, aren't we?
Yeah. So we touched on self-awareness and we've touched on boundaries, and we're now going to talk about communication.
Yes, and how to communicate well despite our limitations,
Yeah.
or try to communicate well.
Yeah.
Drawing on our own experience of expectations and things we had and not communicating them very well.
Yeah.
So communication, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Why do you think communication is so important?
I think it's really important because often or sometimes we think people can read our minds, and if we don't communicate, then we can't expect other people to understand
Or
respond
the way we want them to respond.
Yeah, understand where we're coming from.
Yeah.
And be able to have a conversation about things.
Yeah. Is this what marriage taught you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And so that's something.
Shall I say marriage is teaching you?
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing with all of this, is it's very much a journey, isn't it? We've talked about self-awareness and boundaries, and it's so easy to sort of talk about the theory, or how we think it should happen, and actually living it out is another issue, and is a constant opportunity to learn, isn't it?
Constant opportunity to learn. You put it so positively. That's really good. Yeah, definitely. And I just thinking about communication, I mean, the place where you really learn to communicate is in the family home, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely.
And depending on how your parents communicated with each other and with you, that's going to impact you, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And so in the context that you grew up in, and if you've watched the other videos, you probably have a little bit of an idea of what it was like, slight idea. But how do you feel communication in your family home impacted your self-awareness and your boundaries and being able to communicate well with your family and others? Big question.
Oh, big question. I think I'm becoming more aware of that through being a parent myself, and looking at how I communicate and why I communicate the way I do, and what I'm modelling. Because I think that's the thing, is that what we do as parents is modelling to our kids, so that they see, oh, that's how I should do it, or
big responsibility.
And so it is a big responsibility. And so I think it's important to be honest. I think it's important. I'm not really answering your question in terms of my upbringing, because I think I'm still kind of really understanding it for myself.
Yeah.
And processing that. But I would say, I think it's important to be honest. I think,
and that's easier said than done. I think we all would agree, honesty is the best policy.
Yeah.
But that can be quite hard when there's conflict, or when there's it's being honest about your expectations, for instance. That's one example. Honesty is it's quite broad, say, to be honest, but honest in what your expectations might be. And if you're not self-aware, or if you're not aware that you have certain expectations in place, and you get frustrated with someone because they did not read your mind, and so they didn't
never happened before.
They didn't do the way you wanted them to do things, then you get a bit frustrated with them. Whereas actually, when you realize, I had these expectations because that's how my family worked, for instance. That's particularly within marriage. Your family works a certain way, and that's kind of the example you've been set.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in terms of honesty, the first thing is being honest to ourselves. Because often I don't think we're honest to ourselves, and we try and suppress. I've touched on this before, but we can kind of suppress how we feel, because we might have this idea that it's bad, or that it's not it's not loving, or it's selfish or things like that. And in terms of for going back to sort of like growing up, if you're kind of taught that, you know, and it's tricky because a lot of things are also cultural. You know, we're taught to be polite. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But I think sometimes, I think often we're not taught to acknowledge our feelings. We're just sort of, the behavior is what's focused on.
Yes.
The behavior is what's focused on. And so this is where also, I mean, this is a whole other topic, but sort of child development and that side of things is really important, because how you grow up and the things that you were, the way that you were spoken to, or whether someone helped you with your emotions or not, is going to impact you now, so unless you've been on a journey to.
Would you say like
that.
Things that almost were spoken over you? I mean, I think within the Christian sense, we kind of understand that, you know, people speaking things over you, speaking blessings over you and things like that. But also there's this, if someone says, you know, you're silly, or you know, you're naughty or whatever, using some kind of negative language, and they probably misunderstood the context of why you behaved a certain way, but they ascribe that to being naughty or something,
or bad, or bad, silly, or whatever it is. And then that affects you in the long term, and so we have to be very conscious with trying to understand first why someone behaves a certain way before we communicate to them. And then our communication is so much better, because we can then at least understand where they're coming from, and work on not just the behavior, but actually what's behind the behavior. And that voice that you have, or the voices that you have in your head, you know, the people that have spoken over you, I mean, you speak to yourself the most out of anybody in the world. You speak to yourself the most. I
think we're our worst critics. We criticize ourselves so much, don't we?
And it also can affect our communication with God. Because if we're not honest with ourselves, and we're not honest with our own emotions, and we're not honest with where we're at ourselves, how can we also expect ourselves to be honest before God?
And I think also we sometimes try and get away with saying like, God knows everything, and so therefore I don't really need to tell God because he knows. But that's part of the problem, because you're still kind of hiding stuff, and it's when you bring it before God in an honest and open way, that's where I think a lot of release happens.
So that's a really important part of communication, because if we're able to be honest with ourselves, honest with God, that's going to help us to be honest with other people as well. It's going to help us in our communication with others, and it's going to help with the other areas that we've already talked about as well, I think.
And one of the examples of communication where we had expectations or an idea, maybe an expectations or idea, was a few years ago, I'm losing track of time, when we were part of another church in Bournemouth. We were home group leaders, and we had this responsibility, but also we felt, man, we're so busy with our lives. There's so much going on. So we were struggling, and one of our home group members came up to us and said, you just need to be a bit more organized. And I remember Lucy breaking down in tears and like, what? No, how could you say that to us? But that's because we were, first of all, honest in saying how we felt. And like in our perspective at the time, we thought there's just too much going on. We can't really do things very well. And in their honesty towards us, they said, maybe you should be a bit more organized. And at the time, we didn't take it very well.
No.
But those words were so true.
Definitely. So that's the other thing, isn't it? With communication, often we think about talking, but it's like, we should listen. We need to listen as well. And that's so important. And
it's hard to weigh up someone's criticism when you already feel quite low about something or down about something. But it's actually, it's so important to weigh it up and to say, okay, well, do their words carry weight? Is it really true what they're saying?
And being able to ask for help as well, because
how else are you going to become more self-aware?
We've talked about sort of like knowing your limits and your boundaries and things. I think the amazing thing about being part of a church or a family community is knowing those limits, and then being able to sort of ask for help if you need to. And sometimes we're not able to fulfill a role, or we maybe might need to step back from something. But being able to communicate with other people and talk about it, and so that we can help each other to kind of work out, okay, well, how is this going to work? So being able to be open and honest in a safe environment,
non-judgmental environment.
Yeah.
And I think also, if you feel you've got so much, or you're in a position where if you were to take a step back, that something will fall apart, I think that's quite a big responsibility or a big pressure you put on yourself, and you might feel, I can't walk away from something, or I can't step away from something that I'm already doing, because that thing, not to sound vain or anything, but you might feel like, if I go, this thing's going to fall apart, or it's not going to, whereas actually that's not necessarily the case, because we might put this pressure on ourselves. But ultimately, I think the way I see how God works is God wants us to flourish, and sometimes we, in our eagerness to do things and help, we take on things that actually, and we get so deeply involved in things, when actually we realize, I'm kind of not really using my full potential here. I could be much better somewhere else, or I don't know. It just depends on what's going on in your life, and that's again ultimately where we can trust that God will fill that space up, and it's not reliant on us, but it's again communicating that with God, isn't it?
Yeah, and with each other, and I mean, definitely communicating with God, but also with each other.
Yeah.
And being able to make a plan with others within the church, hopefully.
There you go. Now that a child is running around in here grabbing our attention, I think that's really about communication, isn't it?
Yeah.
We thought it was going to be a short one, but
yeah.
Don't know how long that was.
So the last video in this series is all about motives, which we thought was quite an important topic to talk about, especially within this series of self-love and selfless love.
Yeah.
So hopefully you'll join us for the last video. I hope you've enjoyed this, and please comment with your thoughts and your experiences too. We'd love to hear.
See you there.
Bye.